Good morning and welcome to our final curriculum conversations event of the spring 2026 semester. My name is Christina Stanchu. I'm a professor of English here at VCU. We are also direct the VCU Humanities Research Center, and we are delighted to welcome all the panelists from near and far for a great event today, co-sponsored by the Institute for Collaborative Research and Evaluation, the International Education Studies Center, and the Global Education Office at VCU. I'd like to say thank you to my colleagues Ellie Musgrave and Hilary Levinson for helping put together this event, and Dr. Levinson will also help moderate the Q&A at the end. I don't know if there are new people to Zoom. You can use either the chat or the Q&A box to ask your questions, and then Jesse and Hillary will field them in the order in which they are received. Most of all, thank you to Dr. Jesse Seneschal for entertaining the idea of this presentation and for his tireless work in bringing everyone together today. So today we gather with educators from around the globe to discuss education, equity, ethics, and the future of global teacher preparation in the age of AI. And we're delighted to be joined by participants from Fiji, South Africa, Tanzania, Portugal, Thailand, Cambodia, Pakistan, and the United States. And we had a nice chat right before we started on the various time zones. So there's there's a lot of variety. So thank you for being here, even at very late or very early hours in your respective country. Bringing all of us together today, as I said, is Dr. Jesse Seneschal, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for Collaborative Research and Evaluation, or ICRE, here at VCU, where he leads interdisciplinary teams in designing and implementing collaborative research and evaluation projects that aim to improve outcomes for individuals, organizations, and communities. His work supports strategic partnerships with K through school K through 12, excuse me, K through 12 school divisions, higher education institutions, state agencies, and community-based organizations. Dr. Seneschal has over a decade of experience directing research practice partnerships and currently co-leads developmental and participatory evaluations statewide and local initiatives. He is just a wonderful colleague to collaborate with, and I'm so grateful for bringing all of us together. Dr. Seneschal and esteemed guests, thank you so much for this opportunity to learn from and with you today and to discuss a pressing topic for all of us. Everyone, welcome, and on to you, Jesse.
Okay, thank you, Christina and Ellie and Hillary. I'm going to put some slides up. Thank you all for being here. And I'm excited about our discussion today. So it's today's May 13th, although from our guests from Fiji Islands, it's actually May 14th. I think they're one day ahead of us right now. But I want to again extend thanks to the VCU International Education Studies Center, Shanghai Normal University, the UNESCO Teacher Education Center, which was the group that brought us together, and I'll be telling the story of this a little bit, Global Education Office and Humanities Research Center, all of which really played critical roles in this project. And I just want to, it wouldn't have happened without you all. So thank you. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to give a little bit of background on the project that we're working on. And then that's going to tee up a series of readings, and each of my collaborators from across the globe, bringing their perspectives from their countries and their schools and institutions and their professional roles, are going to share a story about how they're seeing AI roll out in their context. That should be one chunk of our session, and then we're going to move into some discussion. I've got some questions that I'm going to pose to the panelists and kind of open it up for a dialogue. And then there's also going to be time for questions and comments. If right now, it'd be great if you could, and this is to all the attendees, if you could put your name, professional role, and institution in the chat, just because I'm very curious around who's here today. And also feel free to use the use the chat through the presentation to pose questions or respond to ideas shared. I hope that we can kind of continue this idea of this being a dialogue. That would be great. And I don't know. I'm not seeing the closed captions. Are other people seeing the closed captions on the screen? Maybe we can see if we can get that working. All right. All right. Look at this. This is great. Well, thank you all for coming. All right. So these are the collaborators on this project. You can see their names here. Um, uh, what we can see here is that we have a wide range of folks from not just a wide range of countries, but also a number of different institutions playing different roles. They're all in the space of education, but with a lot of different roles and responsibilities. I want to note that um, three of our collaborators were not able to make it today. I'm hoping that the rest of our group is here today, but um, this is the team that really made this work happen, and so I want to just give a big shout out. And you'll be hearing from many of them today. So I want to give you a little bit of background on the project. It started a year ago. Actually, a little bit before a year ago, I was invited by the International Education Studies Center at VCU to attend the STEM Teachers in the AI Era professional development at Shanghai Normal University. I'm part of the UNESCO Teacher Education Center. This is a picture of the education center, and it's an amazing space. I wish we had something like this at VCU. Um, the whole focus of this is teacher education. It has all sorts of classrooms and lecture halls, and there's a little library, there's a dining hall, and it's also a hotel. So when we went, we had 40, I think around 40 participants in our program, and we all stayed in this building, in the hotel part of the building, and then would come down and have lectures and presentations through the day. And it was a really amazing time together. Um, and the 40 participants in the program represented, I think, over 25 different countries, which was just a really phenomenal part of the program. And you can see, I don't think I have all the countries here, but this is what I've marked in terms of like the different perspectives that were represented at this gathering in Shanghai. And our experience there was sort of, I kind of think about it in sort of three different parts. One part was presentations. And so each morning we would go down and have breakfast together, and then we would move up to a classroom space, and we would hear presentations from educators and researchers that were doing work around AI and education and the intersection of the two. And some really interesting kind of, cutting edge research going on. This one on the left, the MAIC technology, was this idea of a massive online course, except in the massive online course, all of the students were AI agents rather than humans. But you would interact with these different AI agents in this online learning space. You can see up in the right corner this classroom with the students. This was a program that they had developed to help train teachers, and teachers would get up in front of the screen and they would teach the class of AI agents, and the AI agents would raise their hand or they might put their head down on the desk, and it was meant to sort of simulate a real class. You can see down in the bottom right that we also had presentations about sort of like global education trends. This was a presentation of TALIS data, which is like teacher trends and sort of teacher the teacher workforce. And so there was all sorts of discussions around education, AI, STEM education, and this was sort of our morning part of the session. So a lot of ideas were generated through this. Then in the afternoons, we would go on field trips, and the field trips included, you can see on the left here, we'd go to educational technology centers. This was one where they were doing all sorts of like sort of classroom technology. You can see there's this computer here that they have where there's all these ways of like plugging in and kind of doing kind of hands-on robotics types of building. There are a classroom space where there are cameras everywhere, and they would record teachers teaching, and then that would be turned into transcripts that then teachers could like learn in real time from these observations. They also took us for cultural events, and so you can see over here. There's a we went to several schools, and at the schools they would we did some dumpling making at one. This was where we were making these rice these kind of sticky rice balls with like I think a lot of banana leaf or a lotus leaf wrapped around it. They took us to an industrial site. This was a shipyard. And not just the industrial site, but they took us to the school next to the shipyard where the students were building models of ships. And so a lot of like kind of thoughts about integration of sort of like this the school curriculum and sort of like the industrial program that surrounds it. And then the third thing that we did was we got to explore Shanghai, which is just quite an amazing city. We got passes to go on the subway, and they have this beautiful, efficient subway system. We got to travel all around Shanghai, and and it was an amazing time. And what I can say about it is that I enjoyed it so much because there were so many different perspectives represented. And I would just like go from person to person and just sit down and can we talk? And I was like, tell me about your school. Tell me what your education systems are like. What are the challenges you're facing? You know, what does the teacher work look like? And from that, it this became this kind of a case study for me where I was just like learning and learning and learning about how education looks across the globe. And I was journaling through it too, and I was writing down all these ideas I had, like what all the things I was learning. You know, kind of it really impressed with all the similarities that we were, you know, in terms of our experiences, but also the differences. And I just want to share some of the ideas that I had coming out of Shanghai that led to the initiation of this project. One was that, you know, as I was having conversations with folks about AI in education, I was thinking that we need to consider the question at multiple levels. We need to think about the effects of AI on the practices of teaching and learning for sure. Like we can see how AI is impacting teachers' work and also learning. We have concerns, for example, about how it might be impacting, you know, critical thinking or how it might actually create opportunities for personalizing learning. I also saw that AI should be a focus of study. Our world around us is changing as a result of AI, and students need to understand and be literate in AI in order to kind of interact with the world and think about like thinking about the jobs of the future, for example, or thinking about how to navigate AI as it interacts with political systems and democracy and all these other things. It should be something that we build a critical literacy for. And also AI is getting integrated into our administrative systems within schools. And this is something I was seeing across all the conversations I was having and ways that it's being used for assessment and testing and just kind of running all the systems that make education happen. The second big idea I had was that the adoption of AI in education happens within complex contexts. In my conversations, I saw that conversations about AI in education also got you know blended into conversations around the economic context. What are the jobs that are around? How does you know sort of economic conditions within different contexts affect how AI is rolled out? Also, cultural contexts. AI has a big influence on how culture is developed, and it's there's a lot of you know possibility, but also concern in that space. And also the political context. All of this is happening in sort of a political context where resources are allocated in different ways. Um, I saw a lot about the important relationship between AI policy and practice, where you know practice is moving forward quickly, and then there's policy that's trying to catch up with it. And you're going to see some of that in our readings today. Um, Discussions of AI sharpen our focus on the human dimensions of teaching and learning. This really became a big topic of conversation in our group around how when we start to think about AI, we really start to draw clear lines of like where the technology ends and the human parts of teaching and learning begin. And then finally, you know, across all of the folks that I was having a dialogue with, there were really strong arguments expressed both for and against the adoption of AI in schools. And one of the frameworks that I kind of developed, I remember sketching this out on a pad when I was in one of the sessions, was how do individuals position themselves? It kind of is a framework that answers these questions. How do individuals position themselves in relation to AI? And how do systems position themselves in relation to AI? And when I say systems, I mean an educational system, a governmental system, et cetera. And one is that we can think about it as people that adopt AI and that are the AI adopters versus those that are resisting AI. And I've sometimes, shown this diagram and said, where would you put yourself? And some people say, I'm a resistor, or I'm an adopter, or I'm somewhere in between. And I think that's fine. But I think the thing that we also need to consider is whether we're having a critical or uncritical stance towards the technology. And what we hope is that we're operating in that critical space. And if we resist it, there are good critical reasons for resisting it. I mean, there's some real threats and risks that this technology has, but there's also some good reasons to adopt it. And we have to, in either case, make that decision in an informed way. What I worry about is when people either resist or adopt the technology in an uncritical way, and that's where I think the biggest risks are going to manifest. So this project, the timeline and the process. So we met in May. I think, in fact, I think exactly a year ago we were in Shanghai, and I came home from that trip a little jet lagged, but from that jumped right into a grant writing workshop. Actually, at the very end of on our very last day in Shanghai, I remember going around the cafeteria that morning and saying, "Can I get your email? Can I get your email?" And I got a list of like 40 emails from just going around all the tables. And I sent out an email to everybody and said, like, let's stay in touch because I want to continue this conversation. And so, but when I got back to the United States, a couple days later, I was at a grant writing workshop, and I saw that the Global Education Office at VCU was offering a small global impact planning grant. And I was like, maybe I can apply for this to do some extension of the dialogues that we were having in Shanghai. And so I emailed my list, and a bunch of people got back to me and said that yes, they'd be interested. And we were awarded that grant, which was great. So it's given us some funds to provide stipends for our collaborators and a little bit of time to support the production of the work that we're going to do. And then what the grant entailed was having a series of dialogues from November through May. And so I took some of the notes that I had put together and I put them into some initial framework. Like these are some of the ideas I have, and I sent them out to the group, and they provided feedback on it with their perspectives. And then we came together for three dialogues that were kind of online, similar to this, and we would come together and just talk through. And those were recorded, and I took notes from those. And from that, these dialogues were guided by three core questions. The first question was across global settings, what's the current integration of AI into primary and secondary education? What are the immediate plans for further integration? And what are the debates around integration? The second question was, how is AI currently impacting the professional work of teachers? As AI is further integrated, how might the work of teachers change? I'm really interested in how teachers are adapting to the technology. And then finally, what are the implications of AI for teacher development, both pre-service, like teacher preparation, but also in-service development? I think there's really profound implications, and I wanted to kind of get perspectives from across the globe on this. And so these were the guiding questions for our conversations, and this led to the development of, after like listening to the conversations and recording those and looking at the data, several themes kind of popped up. One was around infrastructure inequality as a core barrier. The second is cultural values and local knowledge are at risk. The third is this idea that there's a pressure to adopt AI, but it's very haphazard. Another saying that policy is not keeping pace with the technology, that the technology is moving really quickly and policy is moving very slowly, and that's a problem. There was a big discussion, as I kind of hinted at earlier, that there needs to be things that remain human in teaching, and that we really need to preserve that and carve space out for that, because otherwise we might be at risk of like offloading too much of our teaching work to the machines. And finally, that we need to build a critical literacy for using AI. And so what we did from that is after those themes were developed, we started doing some collaborative writing, and each of the collaborators was assigned a theme and wrote like a 400 or word or so, 400 to 600 word response to this theme with some guiding questions under it. And right now we have that collaborative writing document, and today we're going to be presenting some of that work, and so I'm about to pass it over to some of my collaborators to read their pieces. And then later in June, we're going to be publishing this as a report through ICER. So this is the map of the folks that are part of this collaborative writing project. And so you can see how where these perspectives are coming from, which I think is really helpful to keep in mind as we're listening to the readings today. So with that, let's get into the readings. So Teaching in the Age of AI, Voices from a Global Dialogue. And we are going to start with Addie. Addie, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. All right. Bula, and good morning to everyone. I'm Andy McDonald from Fiji National University in the South Pacific, and I serve as an environmental science lecturer within FNU. Now, my presentation explores the relationship between AI, cultural values, and local knowledge in education across different contexts, specifically for Fiji. While artificial intelligence offers many opportunities such as personalized learning, efficiency, and easier access to information, it also raises important questions or concerns about whose knowledge and perspectives are being represented. Most AI systems are trained mainly on information from the global north, meaning that Western ideas, values, and cultural references often dominate AI-generated content. For countries like Fiji and many Pacific Island communities, this creates a challenge because education is not only about academic learning, it is also about preserving culture, language, identity, and community knowledge. Practices such as storytelling, talanoa, communal learning, and indigenous knowledge systems are central on how students learn and connect with their culture here in Fiji. There is concerns that heavy reliance on AI-generated materials could gradually replace these culturally grounded practices within more standardized and globalized perspectives. This is sometimes referred to as digital neocolonialism, where dominant cultures shape the knowledge produced through technology. However, AI does not have to be harmful. When used critically and creatively, it can also produce cultural preservation. For example, students can compare AI-generated responses with local stories, oral histories, and community experiences to identify biasness or missing perspectives. In Fiji, AI could even be used to create culturally relevant materials using local knowledges, examples, and traditions. This highlights the important roles of teachers and teacher educators. Preparing future teachers for AI integration is not only about technical skills, but also about developing critical AI literacy. Teachers and students must learn to question AI outputs, recognize bias, and ensure that local voices remain visible in education. Ultimately, the goal is balance. AI should enhance learning without replacing the cultural values, histories, and human relationships that make education meaningful. The key question we must continue asking is, if AI becomes the dominant storyteller in our classrooms, whose voices will shape the students' trust and whose voices may slowly disappear? Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Very nice. Great start. All right. Let's see who's next. Is Usra here? She wasn't logged on early, but I'm not sure if she made it on or not. Okay. All right. Well, let's go on to Janjira.
All right. Hi, my name is Chenjira Sakit. I'm the Assistant Dean at Faculty of Education, Chiang Mai University, Thailand. And my topic was on building critical AI literacy for higher education in Thailand. Should I just read the piece, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Or
so in the age of AI, it's not enough for teachers to know how to use technology. What is more important is critical AI literacy, the ability to think carefully about when, how, and why to use AI. In my context, critical AI literacy means more than knowing how to use AI tools. It goes beyond technical skills. It also involves decision-making framework that helps teacher to determine when AI should be used, for what purpose, and under what condition. It means understanding when to use AI, when not to use it, and how to use it in a thoughtful and responsible way. This ensures that AI supports meaningful learning rather than being used automatically or uncritically. From my experience as a lecturer and as a trainer who leads AI workshops for teachers and students, I have observed different patterns of AI use. Many teachers and students can use AI tools to generate content, such as lesson plan, summary, or translation. However, not all of them question the quality or relevance of the output. This shows that technical skills alone are not enough. In practice, critical AI literacy, oops, sorry. Uh, Critical AI literacy for teacher means being able to evaluate AI generated content, adapt it to their local context, and design learning activity and still require students to think. Teachers should not use AI as a shortcut to replace their professional judgment. Instead, they should act as learning designer and critical evaluator. This skill can be developed through structured teacher training, such as using case-based learning, comparing AI-generated and human-created material, and reflective discussion activity. Currently, many teacher education programs are still focused on teaching how to use AI tools rather than how to think critically about them. Teacher may learn how to create material quickly, but they are not always trained to question or adapt those material. This is a gap that needs to be addressed. For students, critical AI literacy means learning how to question AI output, not just accept them. Students should ask, is this correct? Does this fit my context? And what might be missing? AI should support higher order thinking, such as analysis, evaluation, and creatively, not replace it. To support this, teacher needs several important competency. First, they need basic knowledge of how AI works, including its limitation and possible bias. For example, many AI systems are trained from data, which may lead to cultural bias or missing local perspective, especially in language use and education content. In Thailand, for instance, AI-generated teaching materials sometimes include examples that are not culturally relevant or aligned with the local curriculum. This requires teachers to critically review, adapt to content before using it in the classroom. Second, teacher needs strong critical thinking skill to evaluate accuracy, appropriateness. Third, they need the right mindset or disposition to be reflective, ethical, and responsible for when using AI. They must be aware that AI is not neutral and may reflect global inequalities. In my context, uh, teachers often learn to connect AI use with pedagogical approaches, such as place-based learning, We encourage pre-service teacher to create teaching and learning content based on their local context, cultural values, local identities, and student lived experience. The important thing is that pedagogic concern makes them aware of their culture and identity. So they are aware that they integrate AI into their teaching and learning. I asked pre-service teacher to compare AI content with the local knowledge and cultural values. This helps them to see that AI outputs may not always represent their own context. Through this process, they become more aware of the limitation of AI, develop the ability to adapt content more meaningfully. Is that the time already? Or should I continue?
Please continue.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can also be used to create learning media for students in remote area, helping improve access to education. However, this must be done carefully with critical evaluation. From my experience, teachers who engage in these practices demonstrate improved critical awareness and are more confident in questioning AI outputs rather than accepting them at face value. At the same time, some university and faculty of education have started to use AI literacy frameworks, including in Chiang Mai University as well. These frameworks help guide teachers on appropriate use, assess them, their competency to promote ethical awareness. It's similar. If similar frameworks are introduced in the school, they can provide clear guidelines, and help prevent misuse. They can also support development of responsible and reflective AI user. However, there is also clear tension in current practice. On one hand, teachers are being encouraged and sometimes pressure to use AI to improve efficiency. On the other hand, building critical capacity takes time, reflection, and pedagogical intention. If AI is used only to save time, teacher and student may rely on it too much and reduce their own thinking. This creates a risk that AI replaces rather than supports learning. This raises an important question. Using AI improve efficiency towards what ends? If efficiency only leads to faster content production without deeper learning, it may ultimately undermine education quality rather than enhance it. Therefore, the goal should not be only to promote AI use, but to promote the thoughtful AI implementation. AI should be seen as the thinking partner, not replacement for human thinking. Teachers play key role in guiding students to use AI in the way that enhance learning, preserve critical thinking, and remain sensitive to local context. In conclusion, critical AI literacy is essential for both teacher and student. It ensures that AI is used in a meaningful, ethical, and context-sensitive way. More importantly, it helps preserve the role of human thinking in education, even in the world where AI is being more powerful and more present. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sanjira. That's great.
Welcome. Maybe can I talk a bit about the slide as well?
Yeah, sure. Please.
Yeah. Actually, the picture at the bottom, the teacher, they use place-based learning to create the AI teaching material. And these are the teacher from we call police border school. So they are in remote area. So they seize the benefits of AI, but also they have to be aware of the local context. This is what I wanted to present. The above one is like in the city learners and educators. Yeah.
Great. I'm going to wrap back around to that point.
Okay.
I'm very interested in the urban-rural divide because that's come up quite a bit. And so I'm going to wrap back around to that in the discussion.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanjira. So next we have Manasa.
Bola and good morning, everyone. My name is Manasa Bulumbunuya from Fiji, representing Fiji National University as an assistant instructor and technician. So I'll be talking on AI education, integrating Fijian cultural values into digital learning. As we know that AI is changing education worldwide, especially in Fiji. And in Fiji, the way we are looking at it, it can improve learning, access to information, and digital skills. However, education should also protect and promote Fijian cultural values and identity. This is what I believe, and this is what I think is good for Fiji and the Pacific. And I know it applies to other places who promote their cultures, who protect the tradition in facing AI. So the importance of our Fijian cultural values. In Fiji, we hold our culture very close to ourselves. Respect is one of the big thing in our culture. We call it Ventokai. We also do and community and togetherness. We do work together. We do it's like a communal, more like communal work. We sharing and cooperation, protection of traditional knowledge and language. These values shape how students learn and interact in our society. So how can AI support Fijian culture is it can help preserve indigenous language and stories, sorry. It also can provide digital platform that can include local example, tradition, and our history. And AI tools can also support remote and rural learners across Fiji. As some of you may know, Fiji is more than 300 islands far from each other. So AI can support these remote and rural learners. Students can also learn global technology skill while staying connected to their culture. Some of the challenges I can say that is faced right now, as you can see in the picture, is limited internet. It's on the slide. We are still using Blackboard, play cards, and some of the community, especially outer islands, inlands, and also risk of over-reliance on foreign contents and system. Loss of our cultural identity if local values are ignored. These are some of the challenges that I come up with. And the need for teacher training in AI and digital literacy. With this, I come up with some of the recommendation. And if we develop AI learning tools, we should incorporate with local cultural content so that students, while learning AI, can still have their cultural with them, the cultural identity, and the content should be there. Include Fijian language and tradition in digital education. Train teachers on ethical and culturally responsive AI use, and also improve digital infrastructure in rural areas. Just to sum up all of this, AI has great potential to improve education in Fiji. Technology should support, not replace, Fijian cultural identity. By combining innovation with cultural values, Fiji can create a more inclusive and meaningful digital learning future. Thank you. That is all.
Thank you, Manasa. That was wonderful. I miss you. I missed our time together. We had good times. Yeah. All right. Let's go on to our next speaker, Tricia.
Yeah. Oh, in my observation, artificial intelligence is transforming many areas, especially education, where I see its potential to improve the quality of instruction and student engagement. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yet, my work highlights a troubling reality, which means developing nations struggle with AI adoption due to weak infrastructure. And I have this infrastructure gaps and not on global scale, but also within the borders that we must focus on training teachers to adapt AI tools to their unique classrooms settings in a way that works. And I admit that Tanzania is actively pursuing AI adoption in education, despite its status as a developing country. For example, this motivation is supported by the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology Policy, which was adopted in 2025. We designed to build the software foundations necessary for AI. Yet, I observe a significant gap between this policy and the reality of infrastructure inequality. In my assessment, the digital device is stuck. Many public primary and community secondary schools in towns remain offline. And without access to basic tools like computers or smartphone, I declare that teachers and students in these schools are being left behind in the transition to AI. Furthermore, I observe that infrastructure inequality in Tanzania is mostly defined by the stark divide between rural and urban areas. While I recognize that urban centers face their own challenges, the limitations in rural regions are far more severe. The lack of reliable electricity and internet connectivity in these areas creates a dead zone, which I can call a dead zone for progress. As a result, the vast majority of rural public schools remain completely offline. This issue is worsened by personal device gap, as I have found that many teachers do not own the smartphones or computers required to engage with digital tools. Given that majority of Tanzanians live in rural settings, I contend that this inequality is the single greatest bottleneck to AI adoption. For me, the conclusion is unavoidable. We must establish a foundational technology infrastructure as a prerequisite before AI integration can become a reality. And I find a compelling illustration of this infrastructure gap among online students at the Open University of Tanzania, where I'm teaching. In my research, I have observed that students residing in rural areas are frequently forced to temporarily relocate to urban centers simply to access the reliable internet services required to attend lectures and submit assignments. And to me, this necessity for physical displacement underscores a critical reality. Rural students are structurally limited in their ability to adapt AI. If basic connectivity requires such extreme measures, I contend that the more sophisticated requirements for AI integration remain, for now, out of reach for those communities. Nevertheless, I recognize the ongoing efforts and strategic initiatives by the Tanzanian government to ensure that rural areas transition to sufficient and reliable electricity in the near future. Thank you. I beg to present.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. Very, very interesting. Very good. Thank you so much. All right, let's move on to Kim Sron.
Okay. Good morning. Did you hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So, yeah. So now I'm going to share you about our AI in education with a focus on the infrastructures inequalities is a core barrier. Yeah, that we can be share the shape of you are integrating AI into digital learning. Yeah. So the integration of AI into education in Cambodia is often framed as a matters of teacher readiness or innovation. However, more critical factors lie in infrastructures, inequality, which fundamentally shape what teachers can realistically do in their daily practice. In Cambodia, I noticed that disparity in connectivities, device access, and digital reliabilities act as structural constraints that limit the meaningful adaptation of AI in a classroom. Although Cambodia has made noticeable progress in expanding basic infrastructure chain, particularly electricity, I think that digital access remain uneven. I found that the internet connectivity is often unstable and primarily mobile phone, especially in rural area, which limits sustainable use of AI tools that depend on reliable bandwidth, so on. Yeah. In addition, access to appropriate device is limited in Cambodia among rural and urban areas, with many teachers and students relying on personal smartphone rather than school-provided computer or tablet or laptop. These combined challenges such as connectivity device and affordable create layer digital device that extend beyond simple access. This infrastructure gaps directly affects how teachers engage with AIs from day to day. While AI has potential to support lesson plan, feedback, or differentiate infrastructure, I think that teachers in low resource settings often experience only from fragmented use. For example, unreliable internet restricts a real-time interaction with AI system, forcing teachers to rely on occasional access or offline workaround. In many cases, teachers use personal data or device effectively compensating for systematic limitation. As a result, AI is not integrated into regular pedagogy, but remaining in intermediate tool. Actually, infrastructure inequality also reinforce disparity between urban and rural as what I mentioned. So this aligns with broader research showing that unequal access of digital infrastructure lead to unequal learning opportunities. Despite of this challenge, I saw that infrastructure's inequality is not too difficult to overcome. So we need to address by require coordinated investment in connectivity, device provisioning, and teacher support system, so on. Importantly, I think solution must context sensitivity, such as low bandwidth or offline capable AI tool that align with local realities. Without such effort, I would say that advancing AI adoption risks exacerbating inequality, misallocating resources, and creating fragmented implementation. So in conclusion, infrastructure inequality is a central determinant of AI educational impact in Cambodia. Until these fundamental gaps are addressed, the potential of AI will remain uneven and limited, reinforcing rather than reducing existing disparities. Yeah. So in this picture on the slide, everyone might see we try to integrate AI into digital learning, such as flipped classroom, so on in my workplace, that we try to create the video by using from AI, and then the student can watch at home or somewhere when they freeze, and then they come to the class by making experiment to see what is the reality is. Yeah, this is end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kimtron. That was great. Before we move on, I just want to encourage folks in the attending, post some questions in the chat. We're gonna be moving from the presentations into a discussion, and I'd be really curious to see some of the questions that you might have at this point. So maybe if everyone can post a question or two, that would be awesome. And we are going to move on to our next presenter, is Filipa.
So, hello, my name is Filipa. I'm a teacher of lower secondary level here in Portugal, and I also do teacher training to teachers, and I am doing educational research on media labs in education for ISCTE University. So here in Portugal, the Digital Education Action Plan, that was an adaptation of the European DEAP, Digital Education Action Plan, has encouraged all public schools to explore new technologies. Yet teachers ask, and we might ask, what must remain human in teaching? So the future of education cannot be built on algorithms alone, we believe. And even as digital platforms become more present in classrooms, educators, especially those from my teacher training, they still imagine a school where human connection, trust, and relational presence remain at the center of learning. So they worry a little bit if AI becomes too embedded in daily learning of students, they might lose the slow, effortful cognitive processes through which understanding is formed. Instant answers from bots risk replacing deep reasoning and the subtle emotional cues that shape identity and also belonging. In Portugal, many teachers, as I think in the global, they feel pressure to adapt to these AI tools, especially as public discourse increasingly frames digital competence as a marker of professionalism. Some learners are starting to be accustomed to use AI tools, and they also begin to question the relevance of teacher expertise. This is not appearing as an open disrespect, but as a quiet recalibration of authority, an assumption that the algorithm knows more or knows faster than the teacher. As AI becomes more integrated, the core identity of teachers might change. Teachers may find themselves shifting from direct instruction to roles that emphasize ethical judgment, cultural mediation, and the safeguarding of democratic values. And this is precisely where media literacy education becomes indispensable. In a society where AI-generated content circulates fast, learners need structured opportunities in school to question sources, analyze bias, and understand how digital systems shape what they see and believe. Media literacy is not an optional add-on, it is a democratic safeguard. And here in our Media Lab school, a laboratory that we have here, we also question AI generated content with the same 5 key questions used in media literacy. Who put this content in? What perspective is on the focus? How and why it appears this content and not other content. So these transformations of AI, they carry implications, we believe, for teacher development, both pre-service and in-service. The recent Council of Europe's framework for AI literacy highlights 3 dimensions for teacher training: the technical dimension, how AI works; the practical dimension, which tools do we have to use in the classroom; and the human dimension. The human dimension, understanding AI impact on rights, democracy, and society, is essential and is the one lacking the most. In Portugal, teacher education programs are beginning to arise and to address AI, but often with a focus on tools, on the practical dimension, and not so much on ethics, pedagogy, or democratic responsibility. Media education literacy must therefore be woven into teacher preparation, and not as a separate subject, but as a transversal competence that shapes how teachers can guide, inquire, dialogue, and critical thinking with their learners in the classroom. Simulations and AI-supported training can help, especially where classroom placements are limited, but they cannot replace the emotional complexity and the diversity of our classrooms. Portuguese teachers express that what sustains their work is relationship, the ability to read a learner's expression, to mediate a conflict, and to build trust. These are not algorithmic tasks, they are human ones. And they are the very capacities students must learn to protect themselves from possible manipulation, polarization, or the erosion of democratic culture. Across Europe and beyond, a shared conviction emerges that education must remain a profoundly human endeavor. AI may assist, but it never replaces the human presence at the heart of learning. Teachers remain guardians of children's rights, mediators of culture and values, facilitators of critical thinking, and anchors of democratic life. The future of education here in Portugal and elsewhere depends not on how quickly we adapt AI in the classroom, but on how wisely we preserve the human relationships and media literate capacities that make learning possible. AI must remain a tool, never a substitute. And like Ken Robinson once focused, teaching is an art form and not a delivery system. Thank you from Portugal.
I love that quote. That's great. Thank you, Filipa. That's very good. All right, I see some action in the chat here. I see some questions coming up. More questions, please. Let's get, because we're about to move into discussion pretty soon. So keep them coming. So many ideas to work with here. So our next presenter, Zaid.
Thank you, Jesse. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zaid Wahid. I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm at the Faculty of Education at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. So I look forward to just briefly talking about my short piece, which is on towards embracing Ubuntu in an era of AI in South African education. And while the discussion will be about the South African context, the idea is, of course, to share insight in terms of how it could be translated and how it can be compared into and with rather other contexts. So the African philosophical ethic of Ubuntu, which is expressed in the isiXhosa proverb, of Umuntu Ngumuntu Gabantu, which is translated as a person is a person through other people. And that's a critical point of departure in discussions around the significance of the cultural values and localized knowledge. So Ubuntu promotes reciprocity, respect, shared humanity, compassion, and solidarity within communities. So in other words, an individual is not seen in isolation, but is seen as an extension of the community where he or she benefits from and advances the community's beliefs, ideologies, and values. Now, in every context, there are certain practices that embrace culture, language, and identity. And in South Africa, for instance, we have what is known as stokvels, which is a community savings initiative in which members actively contribute to a pool of funds for the benefit of the community itself. And so the aim is to promote solidarity and shared humanity. Members of a stokvel benefit from the pool of funds to ensure that their most basic needs are met. So the question around, though, whether artificial intelligence risks undermining or displacing specific cultural values or knowledge practices remains critical. And so while AI, I believe, could, for instance, augment some of the roles of stokvels, the reality is that such a practice, like many local knowledge practices, cannot be displaced. And this is because of the strength of such practices, which lies in shared norms, values, ideologies, and trust. Now, in South Africa, teachers, particularly in rural communities and informal settlements who are unfamiliar with AI integration, are less inclined to reshape an already congested curriculum to meet the needs of the current generation of students. In stark contrast, in urban communities of South Africa, the implications concerning such rigidity among teachers would mean that students are assessed according to a prescribed curriculum, which could lead those students with access to utilizing AI for their own benefit. So the concern around efficiency in schools, driven by the pursuit of higher grades, is rooted in a school culture that emphasizes meritocracy. And this emphasis has led to a favorable perception among students and teachers of the potential benefits of utilizing AI in educational settings. However, the potential risks of utilizing AI to improve efficiency in learning and teaching in pursuit of holistic school performance poses a significant concern, particularly when students lose a deeply emotional and social connection to learning. Now, given South Africa's history and with African scholars such as Kwame Nkrumah, who calls for the disruption of the neo-coloniality of knowledge, teachers in South Africa need to be more aware of the possible biases inherent in large language models. The values of Ubuntu are significant in promoting the pluriversality of knowledge above the Western European hierarchical knowledge paradigm currently employed in many LLMs such as ChatGPT, Gemini, and so forth. So if students are taught to embrace these values, I do believe that they will be more inclined to critique the knowledge presented to them through such LLMs at face value in educational contexts. This process of decolonizing the mind, as Ngugi wa Thiong'o calls for, is the type of learning needed in current educational contexts, where students are accustomed to functioning as passive recipients of knowledge. Pragmatically, it would mean that teacher education would need to promote this, the idea of uh, inculcating within students the need to critically examine the root causes of problems rather than merely comprehending contemporary societal issues at face value. I do envisage that as more LLMs are introduced to the market, universities that should be at the forefront of knowledge conceptualization need to pragmatically develop curricula alongside communities and schools towards preparing young learners, students for an uncertain future. Unfortunately, universities in South Africa continue to resort to this knee-jerk reaction in response to periods of disruption. And this is where an Ubuntu-inspired university should play a more critical role in promoting communal and social values towards holistically shaping students who are critically and socially conscious, ethically sound, and pragmatically inclined citizens who work towards the betterment of society. The need to disrupt the unequal power dynamics between universities and schools in relation to an industry that continues to relentlessly push towards AI integration across all spheres of society has become critical. And while I'm yet to observe how generative AI in its current form has leveled the playing field as proponents would argue, one cannot deny, though, the value and usefulness it does bring to the fore as an element of a comprehensive and collaborative ecosystem. However, as more teachers are confronted with AI adoption, particularly in the rural and township schools in South Africa, they are faced with several critical questions, such as what are the fundamental principles underlying generative AI? What kinds of curricular changes are needed to ensure meaningful integration of generative AI? How does one's curricular change, how does one's learners meaningfully benefit from generative AI in learning and teaching? And how do the school's culture and identity align with the aims of generative AI? And so while these questions are of course not an end, but they're rather an opportunity for further critical inquiry into whether generative AI may or may not work for students in classroom contexts in South Africa as well as in similar contexts. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Zaid. That was great. So many interesting ideas. Okay, and I think we have one more presenter, and then we're going to open up for discussions. I see some questions coming up in the chat, and that's great. So, Maria.
Thank you, Jesse. My piece basically looked at AI as a tool, with the understanding that over the years we have used a lot of tools in education with a view to increasing teacher effectiveness and learning effectiveness as well. These tools have essentially simplified the tasks that teachers typically have to make it easier for teachers to prepare for their lessons, but at the same time to make it easier for teachers to get across the content more effectively to learners. We have over the years also looked at various frameworks that have guided the use of technology. The two very common ones being the TPEC model as well as the SUMMER model, which basically talks about the ability to use technology to make it easier for learners as well as teachers. And in both frameworks, the teacher has remained very central in the selection of the technology, central in identifying appropriate pedagogic approaches to use, as well as central in making sure that the curricular goals are met efficiently. My assumption, therefore, is that when we look at AI, we still look at it in the very same context as the technologies that have applied and teachers have integrated to teaching in yesteryears. The only difference, however, is that we found ourselves in a situation where we have a technology that can actually encroach in areas where we knew where the teachers are purview. AI, generative AI in particular, can assist the teachers in generating the knowledge that the teacher would use, in even suggesting the pedagogic approaches to use, as well as suggesting the AI tools that can be implemented or utilized in facilitating learning. So with this capability of AI, it is quite possible, therefore, that you can find teachers who may over-depend on AI to take the role that they typically would be assigned to teachers. For us to be able to use AI meaningfully and ethically, it requires teachers with particular skill sets that will enable critical inquiry and making sure that we truly appreciate the content that has been generated, we can evaluate it, and we can actually even enable our learners to critique the material that's subjected to them. However, it becomes very difficult for us to expect teachers to play that role when there is huge disparity between teachers in a particular country, like in Botswana, in rural and urban areas, where you'd find that in rural areas, exposure to the necessary infrastructure is very minimal, in the sense that teachers may not have the connectivity that they require to access internet-based resources. At the same time, the skill sets for the teachers may not be at par with the skill sets in terms of computing skill sets with teachers in urban areas. So this urban-rural divide would actually place some certain learners to a situation where we see in the picture that I've portrayed, when in an urban area, one teacher would be able to use smart boards and we have access to connectivity and be able to use these facilities, whereas the very same school system would have a teacher in another part of the country still dependent on chalkboards and chalks and paper-based textbooks. So this disparity therefore means that some teachers may have access and others may not, and therefore for us to expect them to critique it at the same level would be unfair. Secondly, we also see a situation where within the education continuum, teachers in secondary schools would have better skill sets and be more able to apply and integrate AI technologies compared to teachers in primary schools. Going up further into higher education, we would have a situation where access to internet-based technologies infrastructure is higher. And then, of course, the competency level of teachers or lecturers is much higher. So the issue then becomes not an issue of integrating technology per se or AI technology per se, but it's an issue of do we have the policy infrastructure that guides how we can apply AI in our teaching, how we can utilize it in our assessments. And we have found in many institutions, myself, my particular institution also affected, where we very quickly trying to come up with policies that and frameworks that promote ethical use of AI, to make sure that our assessments are changed to reflect the fact that we cannot come up with assessments that would require a student to load up a question in ChatGPT and then give you up that response as their work. So we have to be more creative, to be more problem-based, to make sure that our teaching learning objectives are met. And with that disparity, it's really, really important for us to appreciate the fact that we also now have to come up, I think the wider teaching community, consider frameworks that would facilitate the integration of this technology that ordinarily would perform a lot more of the roles, the tasks that teachers used to focus on doing. Overall, therefore, I think, as I said, in higher education, we need to be therefore more concerned about developing frameworks that facilitate ethical use of AI, with particular emphasis in recognizing that we can use it as a tool, as an advanced tool, and at the same time be able to prevent plagiarism. So the need for AI training in both educators as well as students in Botswana is therefore important. But fundamentally, though, is that we still need to build the necessary infrastructure so that this rural-urban divide is addressed. One can argue that a learner who is in a rural area should benefit from the very same taxes that the learner in an urban area benefits from them, because they would be enjoying access to the infrastructure, internet infrastructure that's necessary to facilitate implementation or utilization of AI technologies. So overall in Botswana, the key challenges is not whether or not to use AI, but whether educators, one, are sufficiently skilled and truly have sufficient access to resources that supports adoption of AI, that are provided with guidelines and policies that promote thoughtful, ethical use of AI as a tool, as well as ensuring that we are able to use it in ways that augment the learning outcomes but not promote dependency. Thank you.